Yes. All right. So, thanks. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name's Paul. I'll sit if that's okay, because I'm going to have to drive this, and I won't stand up and down and get in the way of the projector. I'm from Perth, and very happy for you guys to have me over here tonight to talk about the stack, which I find quite interesting, and I've been working with it for a bit over 8 years. So, I'll talk about why we would care about this particular set of technology, what's interesting about it. We'll spend most of the time just playing with some code examples and having a look at it in operation. I'll tell you briefly about our products and what we do, and I'll summarise and open for questions at the end. If you have any questions during the talk, please just interrupt. If you're like me, the reason we care about this type of thing is if you're building business documents, business applications, then there's always a contract or a letter or some sort of PDF output or doc output that you need to produce. In business applications, this seems to be universal in my experience. And as a developer, we need to be able to do the job effectively and know about whatever tools and options are available. There's lots of libraries, so this stack and this API is just another tool that you can use. So if you know a bit about it, what it can do, hopefully you can apply it when it's useful. So, interesting things about this particular stack, which is Java with Openoffice as API and putting REST on top of it, is the accuracy and the options for converting. So you can start with Word documents, go to PDF, or go from Excel to PDF or back to Excel, and in the process you can manipulate the documents. So you can start with something which acts much like a template and then becomes a varied document through the process. And driving this from an application means you're typically, when you need to produce a PDF or a spreadsheet or something like that, you have another way of doing it, which starting from a template gets rid of all the design in code. The API itself has a lot of features, including stuff which gets quite corner case, things like having archive mode on your PDFs, tagging it so that it can be accessible, and you can send your PDFs off to readers for low vision users, things like that. And then putting a REST API on top of that, exposing it as a REST web service, means that your application and that document generation ability becomes universally accessible across whatever platforms you might need your application to be used from. I mentioned using documents as a template or a spreadsheet as a starting point. Then things like developing faster, not less code to style your result, and collaborating, because these documents that you start from are Word or Excel or Openoffice files. A lot more people can work on them or edit them without having to have a development environment or even be developers. And none of this would matter much if it was slow, so performance is a key aspect, and this stack seems to perform well enough to be comparable. Not the fastest, but given the flexibility, it's quite a good compromise. So we'll switch over now into some examples. I'll show a visual example where you can see the process happening, very simple, but one of the options in the API is to expose visually what it's doing. So load up the document, do the substitution, and then save it out. So we'll just be able to watch that happen. And then run a loop example, so it's just sitting there churning out PDFs to see how it sort of runs when it's doing the same process over and over again. And then we'll look at what the Jersey interface looks like in code, and then how to use it from just a simple web form. Sorry, so I'll go back to, switch over to my environment. Sorry. Okay, so I'll start off just a quick look at this class. I think you're probably all Java programmers, so it's probably fairly straightforward for you. There's, down the right-hand side here, you can see a bunch of methods, just initialize, load, save, replace, and shut down. So it's a very simple API. And this is a class that's just built to hide the API interface, so Java code talking to Openoffice through its libraries, just all in one place. So having this class means the rest of the code library doesn't care about how it's implemented. It's just, this is the bridge into the Openoffice world. And so this init method launches the necessary processes and then basically gives us a handle. With that handle, we can then ask it to do things like load documents into the environment, manipulate them through its API, save them out in various formats. So it's not too much exciting stuff to look at it in there. It's just good to know. This code is quite straightforward, and it's available through this stuff. I think through the meetup I can make any of this available, and Openoffice and LibreOffice have their SDKs, so you can get into lots of examples and documentation there. So our first run case is this class here, and so you can see it's got a template called mydoc1.odt, which is Openoffice text file. We ask the util package to load it, and then we do a replacement, searching for this field 1 marker, and change it to a string, and then just do a save as in the end. In this case, my result1.doc. Oh, sorry, my doc1 result in doc format. So I'll run this. I won't do that, just in case I did something I shouldn't have done. So I've just got some sleeps in there, so you can see it's loaded the document in and it's done the replacement, and there's the process. So you'll notice in the code a few sleep statements to slow it down for us to watch. Otherwise, you end up with just a flashing document, which isn't very handy unless you're in debugging mode, in which case, if you're doing complex API calls, and stepping through it and watching the document change as you go, that can be quite handy. Yes? Sorry, yep. So, I'll see if I can do a zoom that takes effect. Okay, yeah, I'll try and work like this. So if I... Good enough from the back, or bigger? All right, yeah, I'll focus on just one area here if I can. The zoom doesn't seem to be letting me get a very specific spot. Anyone know a key shortcut for increasing Eclipse's font size?
Probably just move the window across so it sits the window across the center.
This?
Yeah, move that window across a little bit.
Oh, yeah, sorry, of course.
And then zoom it.
All right, so yeah, so if you're interested in looking at the code, this is the name of the template here, the load call, the replace call, which is just looking up a field, and then some debugging and obtaining the name of the file to write to, and then in the end, this result.doc, my doc1 result.doc is the file that produced when we ran it. So if I can get to a file explorer now, we'll be able to see that. Okay, so 4:15 on my Perth clock is about right. So if I open that up, this is the doc, and it's opened in Word, so it's just a doc file that's produced the result. So that's gone from an Openoffice document, manipulated slightly, just for single field substitution, and then output into a doc form.
So just with your demo, what were you showing us on the screen before, like at each stage of the sleeps? Was it the same document being changed, or was it just a replace one?
Yes. Sorry, so it has there was an Openoffice document, which I can pull that up, and it's a very simple document with a field in it called field 1. So that's the source, the template effectively, and so this was loaded, and we saw, this is pretty much what we saw, this screen loaded up, and then the field 1 substitution happened, and then the export filter was used to save that into doc format. So we'll look a bit closer at the next one, which is it's doing it from a doc form, so importing from a doc into Openoffice, manipulating the file, slightly bigger set of manipulations, and then saving out as a PDF instead. Does anyone want to see the code for the next one?
Yeah.
Very well. Everyone's up for it. Sounds great. I'll even organise a Zoom.
It's good that you keep to 100 odd character.
Just luck, really. Okay, so this one's starting off with my.2.doc. You can see right at the top, hopefully. It's just creating a output folder to work for, and clearing it. Then it's looping, this is set to 20, I believe. Yeah, 20 loops, basically. So loading the template, doing a couple of substitutions, calling the util.replace, and that's that util class, and all that class does is delegate most of the work to the Openoffice API. So 2 fields are being substituted, one called field 1 and one called date time. And then it's getting to a save into a file which ends with a PDF. And in that util class, what I've done is I've got something that just looks at what you're trying to save, grabs the extension and infers the format. And in Openoffice world, you can choose which filter to use. So I've just chose the export filter for PDF because it's a .pdf file. And same with the previous example, which was .doc. I saved it with a Microsoft Word export filter.
So the Openoffice API figures out, oh, he's using .pdf, so I'll invoke that filter.
Oh no! So the util class that I've written here does that interpretation. So and then it passes the correct flag to the Openoffice API to say which filter to use. Yeah. So just simplifies it when from an API using point of view. If I know I'm going to save a .pdf, I'd never save it in anything but a PDF format. I do it by file name. Right, so, and that's it, and just loops again, printing out some diagnostics as it goes. So we'll kick that off. So that's starting up. That gives me time to go and find the directory where it's going to put it. So here it is. So it's dropping PDFs into here. So each iteration here is 1 of 20 is just loading the template, doing the substitutions, and in this case, it's using n and the iteration number to populate just a single page PDF with a few bits and pieces in it. Still a very boring, plain document, just to show the point. We can look at some real examples a bit later. We can see how accurate the translation is based on some real world cases.
Did you say it had a date time in that it was replacing?
There's a date time being passed. Let's see if I can see if it's in here. It's not even using it. So, no, I know one of my other examples was using it. So what I've done is I've left the data going in there for the other example and not made the template do it. But we could drop into the template if you wish, drop a new field in and have it populate.
It can handle other types of just text strings and stuff, right?
Oh, pretty much this, you can start to get into the types of data, but dealing with documents, you're almost universally dealing with text, no matter what it actually means, it's just text. So when your API is passing objects through to become text documents, at that point you care about what object it is and how you would really want to represent it, but then you just convert it to the appropriate string, and particularly in things like dates, where you start off with a time in milliseconds perhaps, since the epoch, and then you basically render that into a day, month, year.
Is it possible to convert PDF to a doc?
So this doesn't take PDF as an input.
But in general, like the API, does it?
No. So the engine itself, the only way it can deal with PDFs as an input is to turn them into an image, which is typically not what you want to do. If you've got a good API, a good PDF with text nicely separated out, it'd be good to be able to extract that into an editable form. But I've played with quite a few tools over time. I've never found one that does a nice job. You can get from a PDF back to Word, But when you start trying to use that Word document, you invariably find that it's just a mess. Realistically, it's been programmatically generated, and you can tell it's got text boxes that overlay other text boxes and things you just never do if you built it by hand. If anyone finds one, I'd love to know about it. Okay. Might try not to spend too much time. We can always come back to anything anyone wants to look at a bit more. We'll come back to towards the end just to make sure we get through the bulk of it. So I'll show you quickly how the REST endpoint looks. So I'll zoom in on this. This is a class called document, and I've got an annotation here using the JAX-RS, and I'm using Jersey implementation. Putting this annotation here creates an endpoint. When you deploy this into a container, there's a web service endpoint that becomes part of your URL, and then these mechanisms here, these annotations on methods here, allow me to create endpoints that the JAX-RS system will automatically plug incoming parameters, serialized and deserialized, into your method and let you access it. So in this case, I've got a post. So this method will be called when I call a HTTP post to this class's endpoint. It's expecting to produce HTML, and it's expecting to consume a coded URL form. And so this form will have parameters for addressee and date. So this is where that date comes from. This letter actually has an addressee and a date in it. And the method, so all these annotations just make it really easy to do all the binding. So you don't have to worry about anything other than annotating it. And when you deploy it, all the plumbing's done. It's quite awesome. So we take these parameters in here, drop them into this letter data pojo, and then basically go through a similar process, just pass this across to a doRender, and doRender just calls the stuff we were looking at a few minutes ago, which is that utils class to create a document. And because we're generating in this web service endpoint, we're generating HTML response. When we're OK, we tell response with an OK and a HTML body. In this case, I'm going to generate the file, dump it onto the server, feed back a link back to that file. And that doesn't have to be that process at all. You can store it in a database or stream it back. There's it's an arbitrary number of options. So without further ado, I shall execute this. Oh, look at that. Couldn't quite do it on that Zoom. So hopefully I'll have a letter form launched. Yep, so it'll be there. So this is the addressee field. The parameter from this HTML form will be bound, automatically plumbed through to the input parameter in that method that we were looking at a moment ago. So there's the endpoint document. So it's the annotation we put at the top of the class, and here's the two bound parameters. So it's very much, it's just a very normal web form, but it gets plumbed exactly through to what we would like it to be plumbed through to in our methods. So, Chuck. And we got O2 yet? Probably not yet. So, yeah, see that hit the server, generated it, fed back the response, OK with HTML, came back to the page, and with the download link, and that's the PDF that was just generated and stored on my machine under the web server. So that facility then is exposed to anything that can generate a HTTP post request, and that can go over SSL as well. And I think over here I won't bother running it, but I've got an example of using the Jersey client library as well, how simple code is to do the same thing from code. So this is building a letter, pojo, making the connection to the web service endpoint, and it gets serialized and passed through to generate the document. So typically code like this with any sort of web service client library will be available for any platform to make the call now to that server we had running. So, Docmosis, the company and projects we work on, we've been using this technology stack and evolving products to leverage it for years for developers. We've got people in lots of different industries, but I've got some examples here of some real-world documents that are produced using the engine. And so you can see the accuracy of these tools. That's probably not much help, is it? So I'll zoom in on here. So this, you can get some idea of the complexity. It actually doesn't look bad like that. Actually, I can zoom this instead. The PDFs are very nice PDFs in the end, quite beautifully rendered and all done from, in this case, this template was built from an Openoffice template, which is managed and much more complex than you can appreciate here because of the number of variables in the output style. But this is done by the Education Department of WA to generate school reports, and they do mass processing a couple of times a year. So they do have the system running all year, but typically they only go through their reporting periods, generating these reports in the millions each year.
So the advantage is you could use a tool like Openoffice to design the report, and then you're using these APIs to do a massive find and replace and output nice documents instead of emails or stuff like that.
That's right. So this is only ever applicable if you're trying to get a document result, because that's what this is all about. And so whether that doc's a PDF or a doc or a spreadsheet, these conversion formats are generally good enough to do industrial strength conversions. But because of the API, we can drive it all from a program, and we can get to a point where we can manipulate the document sufficiently well to scale document production from applications. And you get power from that template. You get it to look like what you want. And so if that conversion is good enough for you, the actual conversion, the actual population, you can do it via API, which is what our products do as well. We spent a lot of effort making sure that you can populate these documents efficiently.
Do you find Openoffice is completely robust, driven through the API?
That's a great question. No.
No. Presumably it's intended, it's a UI app, isn't it? And
Yep.
the server has no desktop console session. So
That's right. So the big don't is don't try and do it in multi-threaded for the API. For whatever reason, there's instabilities in it, and you can do it, but you'll find trying to run it at scale at all, it starts to quake and flop and fall over. So in Docmosis, in our product range, we've don't drive much at all through the API. In the end, you can do stuff, but we actually use the API to load, extract, and analyze the document. And then we do a lot of XML processing, and we create a custom object to serialize during document production. So we do a lot of analyzing up front, and then we use the API to load and convert. Pretty much that's the bulk of it. There are a couple of other operations we do, like updating tables of contents and indexes. So we ask the API to do that for us so that you get your document refreshed or repaginated, which is great. You just have to make sure you don't do that in any multi-threaded fashion. So as you try and do that at scale, you'll find it just becomes unstable.
Is it possible to create a dynamically row in this? Like, was this a template completely, or are you creating this row dynamically?
So this one is quite a complex example. In real life, I was involved in the templates. So this section here is actually just 3 rows that gets expanded. So there's a table within a table, and this bit floods. This bit, is dynamic, but it's got to cut off to not wrap here. And these things are coloured by the engine rendering as well. So it's it's interesting. You can't see the colouring. Oh, well, that's a projector thing. I turn my screen around if you'd believe me, but yeah, there's that person's got a B and then an A. It's all shaded grey. That's really interesting.
So on that, so the square, the 5 boxes across where you're ticking one of them, do you represent that as a Pojo, like, is it actually stored as A, B, C, D, E, and then the template works out where to tick, or how's that going?
So the template says, in this case, it's reading data from Pojos, and it's got a conditional test. If this, render a tick, is effectively in the template. The template has a syntax in it to say, if I've got a positive value for this in my data, which then goes and reflects from the Pojo, and then extracts a true-false value and decides to display the tick or not.
Is the template language Java-based?
That's just a custom thing we built. That's part of the Docmosis product itself, is this language in the template. So unfortunately, that would be a thing you'd have to learn if you're using our technology, is how to do a repeating set of data or a repeating row, or how you'd embed an image and replace it, things like that. That's all custom.
So your language is inside the documents itself?
So we have APIs for driving it from a cloud service or driving it from Java, and we have the ability to pass it data, and inside the template you can choose, there's various controls for how to use and respond to that data. So you can nest repeating sections, so you can have loops within loops or conditional sections, same with tables, and strip things out.
The document has some formulas, and it can act on the data that you put into the document.
That's right. So there's some template controls in there. So that's how we have engineered it, so that you can take a template, add some controls into it, which still don't require plugins or macros, and then run it through the engine. It will do the conversions and the data manipulation as it goes. So I'll quickly just show you a couple more. So this is an interesting project out of University of WA, and what they have done is they've got an engine. They collect a lot of data from satellites, and they basically do galactic analysis of various sorts. I have no idea what it actually means. They farm these out to people's PCs and let background tasks and background scheduling just tick away at computing and sending the results back. There's lots of projects quite like that. And in the end, they used Docmosis to produce this report, which is telling the user what their PC did, which galaxies it was helping with, and which they usually have little red blocks in here to show which bit or which galaxies your PC was responsible for helping out. That's quite neat. Yes, it could be. And this is just another example again. This one's very Word and image based. They have Word templates rendered from iPads. This program runs around with an iPad collecting data on property inspections, and the bulk of it is these images, which are meant to form evidence for condition improvements and condition deterioration. And this has been running using our cloud service for quite a while, to the point where we have some customers who have been visiting the same property so often, and they don't delete their images, that they render images or documents with 800 plus photos in it, which I don't know why anyone would ever use that. Seems crazy, but that's what they do. So I mentioned briefly, we have 3 products, the Java API, so you can add this to your Java projects, a cloud service we run, and a local web server you can run yourself. And we're used in quite a few industries. So that's pretty much the end of my talk. I just wanted to show you what the stack is that we've been building stuff with this for quite a while, but you can certainly do all this yourself. It depends on how much time and effort and interest you have in using these stack to get from document format to document format with data. That's the bulk of why it's interesting to me.
Can you show us a little bit of the low-level API of the Openoffice, the way?
Yep, certainly. Yeah, if you want, if everyone's interested, we can do that now, which is going back to that util class and just having a look at the way it gets a handle to the document. Yeah, sure. So this is just a simple class I wrote just to help with this demonstration. So here you can see this is calling this bootstrap helper, and in here some of the mechanisms are quite obscure, but pardon me, the SDK that you can download shows you examples of how do I load a document, how do I do this, how do I do that, and there's quite a lot of information in the forums and the online documentation to figure out pretty much anything you're trying to do. It's well documented, and usually there's an example that shows you exactly how to do it. But through the API, just bear in mind, just don't expect to do it at scale, and definitely don't do it in parallel if you're going to do lots of manipulation. It generally can work quite well with even fairly complex manipulations, but parallel won't work, and expect the server to die occasionally, and if you restart and run again, it will usually work. So it's one of those things.
So if you had a lot of documents to generate,
Let me
would
zoom
you try
that.
and generate those up front then, given the somewhat instability of the backend?
I've seen this work using a complex set of API calls and run very well in an interactive transactional system. Behind it, it would occasionally take a bit longer because it would crash, restart, run the render again, and it would finish. So I think that was one of the reasons when seeing that in operation is why when I started building Docmosis, I did it differently, to not sort of force that instability to be managed. So in the end, by loading, saving, and doing the indexing, we don't ever run into that type of instability doing it that way. Anything else?
So regarding the conversions, is it essentially you're using the LibreOffice or Openoffice engine to do the conversions?
That's it. Yeah, very much so. So this bit here initializes it, launches a process effectively, and the rest the API hides the fact that you're communicating with this process to get these manipulations or accesses done. Yep.
So occasionally, I guess, you have a bit of trouble with Word documents. ODT documents are a lot more reliable, I take it? Or?
So that first example I showed, which was a school report, they definitely don't use Word documents because while the import and export filters are really quite good, there's certain cases they just don't do what you want. The conversion from Word to anything is always a difficulty. But for that property inspection example, that last one, they use Word documents for all their examples. So you can do quite nice looking documents, but not if you get tables within tables that may expand inside the cell and you don't want the row to wrap, things like that. You just go, better stick with what's more native, which is an Openoffice document, and then go to PDF.
Pretty much anything that LibreOffice can open, you can use as an input.
Yep.
And likewise for outputs.
Yes, that's right. So, and you need to test it for your own cases to see if the conversions are suitable. But there's a broad case where they are, and you can just potentially save a lot of time starting from a document and converting that rather than trying to code it with a code library.
What does UNO stand for?
Universal Network Objects. It's got, I think, like a Corba style of build behind it. So once you start playing with it, you see it goes and asks for factories and then casts the factories to the particular implementations you're after. It's kind of an unusual API, but there's enough documentation that you can figure out what to do with it after a while.
So, would it possible for you to just show a complex template, like from any of the example, like which will be having a table and just bit complex?
Yep. Actually, if I'm web connected, I can download one. I'm to see if I have any here.
Yeah, I think you should be. You're on the Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay. So we have some examples, which this is probably, the realistic ones are probably slightly better to look at. They show a few different features to produce an end result. So these examples we have on our website have both a Word document template and an Openoffice template, so you can pick whichever you like. So this is kind of what a template looks like. Sorry, hit translate by accident. These are just fairly boring, straightforward fields. Here's something a little bit more interesting where it's doing a repeating row. So grab the items. For each item, repeat this row, which prints the item name and the amount, right, justified. So I don't think there's any complex nesting or anything going on there. That's just a table with no borders. And some stuff down here, inserting hyperlinks in here. So
Can you escape the guillemets somehow? Like in French, I've read anyway, use the double angle brackets as quotation marks.
Oh,
Is there a way to escape them?
you can change the delimiter by configuration.
Ah, right.
So that's possibly the best way. There's no escape mechanism built in because of that.
Way out?
Yeah, cool.
If you don't substitute something, then does it default to leaving the placeholder?
There's two modes. You can set it to be like a strict mode where everything should match, in which case it will treat that as an error and raise it as an error. If you leave it as a default mode, it will just go blank. It'll just wipe it out. So if you have references to things that you don't have data for, you just get nothing.
Yeah.
So if you had no items in your data here, those table rows would just vanish.
Yeah, it's one thing that you always see is just, we've got an row or we've mislabeled one of the fields. And
That's it. So
out instead of A and T,
yeah, so that's typically you could do your development in strict mode or testing in strict mode, and it will flag those errors as missing data items. Yeah.
Can you change the color? Like if, let's say, balance is negative, we just flag a red color. Balance is positive, we mark it as green color.
The API supports changing color directly through a table cell. You can set the color in through via your data. So if you pass in a bad value, you can also flag it to be red, and it'll set the table cell to be red. But you can also inject HTML in the more recent versions we've got. So you can inject HTML content. There's limitations to what that can do, but some of it's quite amazing. And so you can inject a table styled how you need if the CSS was all built into the table. Tim?
Can you do images and stuff?
Yes. So
If you want to change the company logo, if you
yeah, that's a very normal thing. In our system, you put a placeholder image in, and then in Word you bookmark it, and in Openoffice documents you name it. And if you pass in a stream or a reference to an image, it'll get replaced. Otherwise, it'll get stripped. Yeah.
Can this be used only for .docs or for .xl?
So we don't do Excel through our system. The stat can. Certainly you can, I didn't show an example, but you can load, manipulate and save Excel files into PDFs or Excel again. But we haven't built anything yet like that. We're still stuck in the doc form and working on that. We'll get to that one day, I think.
The example you said before where they were outputting the class reports. So if you have hundreds, how long do you think a big job would take?
So for those ones, on the systems they were running, they have 26. They've gone to 26 parallel document converters effectively. So they can do
26 servers.
No, sorry, it's one server, but it's scaled to run up to 26 in parallel. So they can be producing 26 documents at once on a cluster of 2. So it's quite heavy duty, and so they're generating. Because it's 2 weeks of really busy reporting, they have to handle quite large peaks. So they're running, potentially 52 documents in parallel to try and meet the need, because the application allows teachers to select the whole class and do all their reports in draft mode.
So that would be 26 instances of that LibreOffice engine.
Correct. So that in the util class has an init method that launches an instance with a handle. So they'd have 26 of those. So there was no multi-threading going on.
So you can parallelize that, but you just can't do multiple within the same engine at the same time.
That's right. And in Docmosis, we've sort of done some configuration, so it'll take care of all that for you. Yep. It'll just launch what it needs to launch based on what you've configured. Okay,
so those heavy jobs would take how long, do you reckon?
So to get to PDF from an ODT, if your data's available, you're looking at 0.3 to, if on a server, probably 0.2 seconds to 1.2 to 2 seconds, depends how big and complex. And particularly the newer reports that school is doing, they have a lot of images in for special education, and that slows it down a lot. You've got much bigger documents, so they take 4 or 5 seconds.
But still, the overall job might only take.
It's interactive, so they can launch the whole school in a batch mode. But the classroom teacher, teacher clicks a button and watches it progress through the 30 kids in 30 seconds or so. there might be 30 kids and maybe it's doing all 30 at once. So it's just sort of the data collection bit where it goes and fetches it all. Takes a bit of time too. Yes?
For the data population on the template, would it support like filtering and sorting? Or is it behind?
Typically the data is passed is quite specific to the report. So the report can filter out stuff, but you don't generally want to pass too much to it. Otherwise you're sort of polluting the processing with unnecessary data. If you're passing POJOs, then it's pretty okay because you already got the data in memory and Docmosis is just going to be extracting data from the POJOs you already have. But if you're, say, streaming it into XML or into JSON, then you would try and cut it down to what's appropriate for the report. So our engine doesn't do any filtering, apart from filtering, it doesn't do any sorting or manipulating except for tabular data where you might want to transform it from a one-dimensional array into a 2 or 3 or 4-dimensional array, particularly that images example for property. They've got one-dimensional array of images, just goes forever, but some templates have 2 across, some have 3 across, so it does support transforms, some simple transforms like that.
Is it a direct mapping with the POJO, like the field name, whatever we have given here? Is it matching with the POJO, or how that mapping will work? So whatever value we have in POJO,
Yep.
and the template, whatever tag we are giving.
Yep. So it will call the standard reflection style of fetching. And so in this example here, where it's iterating over a set of items, it'll fetch the items, go calling get items on the current object, and then within each of those it will call get item and get amount, just reflection type call. Okay, yep. Thanks everyone.